Hello guys, welcome to another video. Now late last night, GGG put out some updated patch notes for Path of Exile's upcoming 3.26 expansion, and these updated notes included a bunch of scarab changes which look pretty good, amongst a few other things. However, right at the top of the update notes is a big change to the Elementalist's Shaper of Winter Ascendancy notable. Now I wanted to make this video because I've seen a lot of discussion about how this is a huge nerf, and I think this is a bit overblown. Some builds were buffed by this change, some were nerfed quite a bit, and others were nerfed but not by that much. So let's take a look at the patch note change first. Here's the current Shaper of Winter notable as it is in game right now, and here's the initial patch notes that were revealed for the first set of changes. The original changes were going to remove the 50% more effect of Cold Ailments modifier, the chills from your hits always reduce action speed by at least 15% modifier, and the chills can reduce action speed by up to a maximum of 40% modifier. And then it was going to add the following modifiers. Enemies chilled by your hits lessen their damage dealt by half of chill effect, and enemies chilled by your hits have damage taken increased by chill effect. So this is what Shaper of Winter was planned to look like initially in 3.26. This would mean that you're still able to chill with any type of hit damage, and you could potentially inflict a 30% chill on enemies, which would make them take 30% increased damage and deal 15% less damage. And now here's the updated notes, and important to mention here, these notes completely replace the old notes, as I've seen some people discussing what exactly this node now provides. Let's take a look at it. Again, this is the current Shaper of Winter. The new notes remove the 50% more effect of Cold Ailments modifier, and also remove the chills from your hits always reduce action speed by at least 15% modifier. And then they add enemies chilled by your hits lessen their damage dealt by half of chill effect. So, important note there. Shaper of Winter is no longer losing the improved 40% cap on chill. This means that you'll still be able to chill with any type of hit damage, and you can potentially inflict a 40% chill on enemies, which would make them deal 20% less damage. So that's the changed Shaper of Winter, and as it currently stands, this is what it will look like on launch day this Friday. Okay, let's make a note of a few things, beginning with how much actual effective damage you were gaining from the previously planned increased damage taken based on chill effect modifier. If this was your only source of increased damage taken on the enemy, then a 30% chill would be 30% more damage. However, it's very unlikely to be your only source of increased damage taken on the enemy. For example, you're likely to have a source of Unnerve, making enemies take 10% increased spell damage, or Intimidate in the case of attack builds, making enemies take 10% increased attack damage. These modifiers stack additively with the increased damage taken from chill. So this would lower the effective damage boost from a 30% chill down to around 27% more damage. And if you're also taking Shaper of Storms and inflicting a 50% shock, or if you're just playing a build that can inflict a 50% shock on the enemy, the chill would work out to be about 18 or 19% more damage because once again, those modifiers stack additively. There's also, for example, Wither to make enemies take increased chaos damage, Vulnerability for increased physical damage taken, Punishment for increased damage taken when the enemy is on low life, or debuffs such as Malediction for increased damage taken. All of these modifiers specifically make enemies take increased damage, and they all stack additively with the increased damage taken from chill effect on the originally planned Shaper of Winter. So the TLDR there is that if you had many sources of increased damage taken on the enemy, the value of Shaper of Winter's damage boost was a lot lower than 30% more damage. Now there's also this unique quiver which already exists in the game, Ahuana's Bite. This quiver has the modifier enemies chilled by your hits have damage taken increased by chill effect. This is the exact modifier that was going to be added to Shaper of Winter. This modifier does not stack with Bonechill support. Chill effect will only apply an increased damage taken effect from a single source. Bonechill increases the effect of chill on supported skills, and makes targets take increased cold damage based on chill effect of the chill inflicted by the supported skill. So there's two takeaways here. If you were planning to play a cold damage build on Elementalist, then you can now make full use of Bonechill support alongside Shaper of Winter, which with the previously planned change, you wouldn't be able to do that as they didn't stack, and the only thing you would have been gaining from that support was the chill effect scaling. And therefore, if you make use of Bonechill, you are only being buffed by these patch note changes. However, if you were planning to play a non-cold damage build, for example Archmage or something else that predominantly deals non-cold damage, then you can't make use of Bonechill's increased damage taken component as it only applies to cold damage, and therefore you lost the increased damage taken component from the planned Shaper of Winter, and as I discussed previously, you can calculate how much damage you actually lost. It's likely a lot lower than 30% more. Now, defensively, Shaper of Winter obviously gained a huge buff here for any build making use of it, because you'll now be able to inflict up to a 40% action speed slow on enemies, and make them deal up to 20% less damage, where previously that slow would have been capped at 30%, and the less damage dealt component would be capped at 15%. Offensively, cold damage builds gained a big buff from this change. Not only can they fully utilise Bonechill support, not just for the chill effect scaling, but also for its increased cold damage taken component, but they can also inflict a larger chill, which is even more increased damage taken from Bonechill and all of the defense that provides. For non-cold damage builds, it's important to recognise which types of builds lost out the most from this change, and which builds didn't lose quite as much. For something such as an Ignite build which is not taking Shaper of Storms, these were likely the biggest losers here, as they can't use Bonechill and they lost the increased damage taken from Chill Effect, which would have been a larger damage boost for them due to not having that many sources of increased damage taken on the enemy. However, for a build such as Archmage, the loss of damage is going to be quite a bit less, because they're going to have multiple additional sources of increased damage taken on the enemy, such as Unnerve and Shock. So, TLDR there, cold builds were buffed by this change, non-lightning damage builds that don't take Shaper of Storms nerfed offensively by this change, and builds that do use Shaper of Storms, or builds that consistently shock or apply other large sources of increased damage taken also nerfed offensively by this change, but not by that much. So why did GGG make this change? Well, my guess would be that this is in reaction to the immediate player feedback that Shaper of Winter was simply superior to Shaper of Storms in pretty much every way due to the overlapping nature of what they provided. Any build that was choosing between the two was pretty much always taking Shaper of Winter because even though it's slightly less damage, it has tons of defense packed in too with the action speed slow and less damage dealt. And therefore, they decided to change Shaper of Winter so that it wasn't stepping on the toes of Shaper of Storms. And now they are both distinctly different, with Shaper of Winter being a defensive powerhouse node, and Shaper of Storms being the exact opposite. Hopefully this was useful to help you judge how much of an impact this had on your planned build. And that's going to be it for this one. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.